for our next segment, I went down some deep public access rabbit holes. Some of them home to Rapid T-Rabbit, a wall-eyed puppet and later full-sized furry who loves talking about public transit and video games. There's also Mrs. Mouth, the upside-down head of a man with eyes drawn on his chin and a wig around his neck, who makes prank phone calls while being spoon-fed yogurt. And Coca Crystal, the far-out flower child who dances and gets high with Debbie Harry and Philip Glass. This and Wayne's World is what comes to mind when many people think of public access. Then there's the less flamboyant programming on these channels, which plays a vital role in local governance and democratic participation. But a new FCC proposal might reduce funding, putting many public access stations across the country in jeopardy. To tell us more, we're joined by Tony Riddle, the Vice President of Community Media here at BRIC. Welcome to 112BK.
Thanks for having me.
Do you have a favorite public access show?
I officially do not have a favorite public access show.
Is that your policy, your official policy?
It's as though you asked your mother, which of your children do you love best?
Right.
And, of course, you wouldn't love one of them more. I love all of them.
And you
even the ones that you mentioned, you know, which are sort of the typically funny ones. But there's a lot on public access that's actually very moving and powerful.
And you yourself have a long career in public access.
Yeah, I started off as a community producer myself about 40 years ago. So
you started out as a producer and public access drew you in. What about it was compelling?
Yeah, so here's what happened was I had a film camera. I had a 8mm Nikon camera that I kept putting in the pawn shop because I was broke all the time. And I looked up and they just opened the Public Access Center in Atlanta about 1980 with cameras and equipment so I just went in to use it. So that was my full interest at the time, was I just wanted access to equipment. But I started understanding at some point that, you know, there's also an audience there, you know, that you have this channel that you can actually begin reaching people. And it started coinciding with my interest as an artist, which was to be able to do sort of conscious work that could affect people's lives and affect the way that people think, and realize, well, this is really a medium that would work. And then gradually I started understanding the whole democratic nature of it and the importance of the structure of a democratic media as opposed to just the content.
And talk to me a little bit about that inherent democratic structure. How did public access television come into being?
Well, the reason it exists is because cable came along, which makes billions, literally billions of dollars off of being able to sell people essentially television. But the only way it can exist is that they have to have their wires or fibers run through the public rights-of-way, either on telephone poles or underground, and only the public has those. So in other words, they wouldn't be able to jump across the street without going through a public rights-of-way. So they have to pay to use that, and the Congress set up laws which govern how they pay. Public access was created because the government felt that we live in an electronic age where it's important for people to have access to communications, to communicate with each other as a society. So public access, in essence, is the public square. So you mentioned a couple of the people in the public square, Rabbit T-Rabbit, you know, and
we all know
Wayne's
that
World
guy in the public square.
Yeah, that guy's in the public square. You can walk out of the building right now, that guy's out there.
Sure.
But you also have poets, people who have ideas about society. You have people that have, you know, religious beliefs, particularly beliefs that are not necessarily common. You have language minorities. You've got people who have come from other countries. You've got young people, old people. Everybody has an equal voice. We don't decide what goes on and what doesn't go on. We put everything on equally.
So the general idea behind public access is that because cable channels are making money off of using public space, that they have to then give back and provide money and space for all of us, for the rest of us, to exchange ideas.
That's exactly right. So the cable companies pay approximately 5 or 6% of their gross, plus a series of different services that they negotiate with the local municipality to be able to operate. One of those services is public access. There's also educational and government access. Government access typically will have city council meetings and so forth. Educational access is what it sounds like. It varies from place to place. I mean, you wouldn't expect somebody to be able to set up a lemonade shop in Central Park and not pay some franchising fees to the city, you know, because it's an opportunity for them. It serves a public good, but, you know, we negotiate these things.
Right. And so tell me about what the FCC is considering doing that would change the way public access operates.
So sometimes it's hard to explain legalistic things, but simply put, the cable company, for instance, here in Brooklyn, is required to provide some support, operating support for Brooklyn Free Speech and BRIC TV. They're required to provide channels because, of course, you need channels. And we in turn provide all of these services. The way that the law is written, the federal law, what the FCC wants to do is start having the in-kind services have a monetary value and subtract them from the 5%. So in other words, all of the money that comes to support public access here at BRIC would suddenly be thrown into the same pot of money that goes into the general budget for the city, which means that there would be a reduction of many millions of dollars a year to the city, and we would be put in competition with other kinds of essential services. Right.
We don't want media and arts to be in competition with putting police officers on the street or other public services, because we know how that goes.
No, and in fact, the law, as it was originally written and as it was discussed in Congress, allowed for both monetary support and in-kind support, like channels. Under the new rules that the FCC is proposing, a very right-wing FCC, which is also the FCC that has tried to eliminate net neutrality, the cable company would be able to, for instance, say this channel that we're on right now is worth $15 million, you know, on the market. So we're going to subtract that from what we have to pay the city. Oh, and in fact, now the city owes us money.
Wow, I see. And so you talked about the FCC a little bit and about how it's conservative leaning. Who is the FCC? Who appoints commissioners, and who do they report to?
Okay, so the party that controls the White House appoints the FCC commissioners. Generally speaking, there's 5, and 3 will be from the majority party, and 2 will be from the minority party, and so that's how it is. So it's always a 3-2 vote, but the chair is always appointed by the party in power.
I see. So we've seen, as you said, an assault on net neutrality. I read that they also recently tried to eliminate subsidies that they provide to Native American lands to subsidize internet broadband. So it seems like they have a quite conservative agenda.
Yeah.
What's at the root of this?
Money.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that's all. That's all it comes down to. So even when you look at net neutrality, the point of that is that the large companies that control your internet access, or that provide your internet access, of which there aren't very many, if they get into having content, then the company that's both providing the internet access and the content can decide to preference the content that they're sending, and the content that comes from BRIC TV could very well come out pixelated or compressed.
Right. We don't want our beautiful faces compressed for our viewers.
Mine could stand a little compression.
Okay, so you're cool with the pixelation, actually.
Pixelation, no. I went through that as a teenager, but compression's okay.
This is interesting. I read that in 2002, in sort of the early days of broadband internet, the FCC decided to designate it broadband internet an information service, which means that it is not subject to the same type of cable licensing fees that we're talking about. But of course, now the landscape has changed completely, and internet providers are actually competing. They are the quote-unquote television, right? So is there a way that that can be revisited, or has that ship sailed and we won't see any investment by internet companies into public media?
Well, it's not really the responsibility of private companies to try to decide what the public interest is, but that's why we have bureaus like the FCC, or why we have Congress and so forth, because you can't just leave everything to the market. So there's going to need to be some public good in any of these services.
Can you tell us a little bit about the programming here at BRIC? So there are 2 channels. Tell us how that's structured and what these changes might mean to the programming here at BRIC.
Well, the simplest version is that it could all go away. We've been here since 1988 in one form or another. BRIC TV is set up to make sure that all of the stories that are important to people in Brooklyn get covered so that we really have a sense of who we are as a community and the wide variety of things that take place that are not covered in mainstream media. So we have this two-pronged approach to providing public information for the public. We have both Brooklyn Free Speech and BRIC TV. Brooklyn Free Speech is all the channels. There's 4, 5 if you count the bulletin board channel. 4 channels completely devoted to the public. The public can bring in any programs that they want, and we will play them as long as they're legal programs. We don't pre-screen them. We also provide classes and equipment so that everybody can have a strong voice. We're really leaning towards teaching people how to tell their own stories. So that's really to give voice to the people in Brooklyn. The problem is that the way the FCC is going, the funding could disappear. Alternatively, the channels could be taken away if the cable companies have their way, because of course they'd like to have more channels for their own programming. I mean, that's their business. That's what they do.
Right.
So, I mean, there's a pretty big danger. There's always been a pretty big danger, and we've always had to fight, through organizations like the Alliance for Community Media and NATOA, which is the cable officers for the cities, have always fought, on the public's behalf. So I feel pretty confident that we'll make it through this, but it is really a struggle, and it's going to require us being able to call on the people who have used the facilities, the organizations that have been helped by it, the people whose stories have been told. We need people to speak up and talk about the value of public access.
We're in a moment of real media consolidation, and I feel like we've gone from nobody knowing who Sinclair Media is to almost everybody knowing who Sinclair Media is and the threat that they pose to democratic media. Can you talk a little bit about why public access programming is still important in an era of the internet? I feel like some people might say, but we have YouTube. We don't need public access anymore.
Let's say you have a cat video.
Which I do.
You do.
It's adorable.
The video, I'm sure, it may be that people can find your cat video, and it may be that they can't. There's a lot of noise out there, So when you think about why public access when there's YouTube, well, why Rupert Murdoch when there's YouTube? Rupert Murdoch, despite his politics, he's a smart person with regard to media, and so he's got Fox News. He's got news on cable. He's got news on the internet. He's got social media presence. So I'm not sure why it would be expected that that the public would be thrown into a big noisy bin while people who have financial interest in commercial media should have a form of media that people can make sense out of. Actually ended up adopting the person.
Wow, that's amazing.
And so if you have like 10 million people watching the show, that's great. But if you had one adoption coming out of that show, that's also great.
Right.
If you look at like Brooklyn, we have one of the largest Haitian populations anywhere in the world outside of probably southern Florida and Haiti. It's big enough, I would say, to be a whole town someplace in the United States, and yet there's no Haitian media anywhere in commercial media in New York City. So even where there would be a financial interest in having such a program, it doesn't exist, which tells you there's biases in the way that even commercial media operates. It's not even just about the dollar. So we're meeting a need in a community that's definitely there that's not going to be met by commercial means.
And I think we're in this moment of talking about who's at the top of all of the major movie studios and the major TV networks, and we're finding that it's very lacking in diversity. And I think, yes, absolutely, that system needs to be changed from the inside, but also public access in the interim provides a means for other voices to be heard. How
things are structured determines what the content is going to be. So if you have a broadcaster, let's say, so that's really a tall antenna that's powered by a lot of energy, that's one voice speaking to thousands of millions of people. On the other hand, you get something like public access. The microphone is spread out all over the place. Everybody is able to speak. Anybody is able to speak. And so the structure is actually democratic. If you want to have a democratic society, you can't have oligarchical media. It doesn't work. If you have a strong central speaking point, then there's always going to be dictatorial forces that try to mount that and to control that. And so the only way to avoid that is to create structures that are democratic in their essence.
You talked a little bit about also trying to provide people with tools and training in order to broadcast their messages effectively. Can you tell me a little bit about what we do at Brooklyn Free Speech TV here at BRIC?
When we first started, decades ago, the whole idea was teach people how not to break a camera.
That's important.
But
still worth learning.
We still start with that. But nowadays, I would say like the generations that are out now are much more media literate. So we're really trying to move away from just the basic training, which we still offer, but more towards sort of an in-depth training, to teach people how to be an effective storyteller.
And so if people are upset about these proposed changes, how can they make their voices heard by the FCC and their legislators?
Well, in our electronic age, there's some really easy ways that you can do that, and I hope that through this program we'll put out the website where people can go to the petition
Definitely.
about the rulemaking that we were talking about. It's always helpful to write or call your local elected officials, because I think a lot of them really believe in. There's only two things that move politics, and that's money and people. And we're not the money side, so we really need as many people speaking out in favor of what we do as possible.
Great. Well, Tony, thank you so much for coming to talk to us.
Well, thank you. This has been great. Where do you get a thing like this?
You can have your very own show.
I'm on it.